and today I'm going to go ahead and recap a talk that I did at RSA. It was a really great talk. I mean, we had good attendance. We really were excited about the topic. We had some good discussion around it. So we're going to go ahead and compress this, get people in and out as quickly as possible, and get, I think, an important topic out there discussing that's important for the industry to kind of wrestle with. My background is the CEO and co-founder of viaForensics. Been a programmer, computer scientist, CIO, authored a couple of books on this topic, and certainly I think like most good geeks, I'm a fan of science fiction, so they threw that into my bio. As we take a look at the mobile security space, what are the challenges that we're really facing? And so, we've seen a lot of time and energy and money being put into malware and antivirus. We've said on other webinars in the past, we really don't think that's the primary issue that folks are facing. So what are the things? A lot of different surveys have come out. Lost and stolen device, that is really one of the top things that we think is driving risk for people. So lost my device was stolen, can my data be accessed? Malware is certainly out there. The topic registers with folks. The press understands it, consumers understand it, but when you look at the incidence of malware on mobile devices, these really are typically edge cases, non-existent on iOS practically, very little bit of it on Android, although it gets the headlines, and pretty much predominantly in third-party app stores, bulletin boards, emails coming in from unknown sources. I would say privacy is pretty top of the list here. Of course, lots and lots of people are concerned about where's my data going, how's it being used, what sort of information is leaking out. And then we get into some more challenging areas where we think ultimately behaviors and data will come to play at solving these problems. These are insider threats and advanced adversaries. Before you get there and try to solve that issue, though, you really want to come to the bottom of it and say, look, we've got a baseline, we understand what the challenges are, and we can now address the challenges with real hard data to try to solve the problems. So, what is root? Mostly, if you look at it from what gets written about in the press, how we hear people talk about it, it's the worst thing out there. It's the most terrible thing that can happen on these devices. And certainly, root has enormous power, enormous privilege. The basic concept here is that they can do anything they want on the system. So permissions don't matter. Certainly, escaping the sandbox, key loggers, anything that you'd want to do, you should be able to do with root. And for many of the folks on this call who are technical, been tinkering with Unix for years, this is not a new concept. The concept of root has been around for quite some time, and really stemmed from the notion of Unix security, and basically it was the root of the file system. And we think really where the origination of this came in. So all Unix file systems are logged off of the root file system, and underneath there you have home directories and kernels, and you've got proc and a whole bunch of other different file systems. And so at the very, very top level of this, you've got the top of the tree, right? And beneath that you have all the roots. So if you're at that very pinnacle of it, you've kind of got full access to the system. And so that's kind of the genesis of where root came from. But in mobile, root became a bad thing. And I think the original reasons early on is that unlike other operating system out there, Windows and Mac and Unix that have been around, mobile really took a different approach. And what mobile did was sandboxed the environment for different reasons. There's certainly security reasons for sandboxing. And the idea behind sandboxing is prevent people from operating outside of their individual space, control them, lock down their permissions, give them dedicated memory so that if there is some sort of problem, the most that they can do is kind of impact their own data. So there's a lot of good reasons to do that. There's also some other reasons. There could be ecosystem reasons, right? So if Apple has the walled garden and they keep you inside their kind of environment, and they have a better opportunity to control your experience and certainly potentially monetize that. But regardless, mobile devices mark a new challenge that IT industry is facing, which is we don't have a legitimate means to escalate privileges. And if you think back to what happened in Windows and Mac and Linux, you've always had the ability to say, hey, I'm an administrator, I control this system, and I need to have privileges on this system to do advanced monitoring, to do endpoint protection, to potentially look, install a system monitor that would be the first to get root, and then could monitor to make sure no other process is trying to escalate privileges, gain that type of access. You've basically lost that ability in the mobile world. And root became a bad thing. It was the jailbreakers, the people circumventing DRM, trying to tether and get around the different wireless caps that they put in from the wireless carriers. But really, there was a much bigger thing at play here, and these were tinkers, do-it-yourself, hackers, people at home just messing around and saying, hey, here's this thing, I bought it, I want to play around with it, I want to explore it, I want to see if I can extend it. And some really, really great things have come out of that. Security research, the CyanogenMod stuff, understanding what vulnerabilities are out there, helping people use their devices in new and novel ways. So for us, root is not really an evil thing. You know, we think about it from the good guy standpoint. And if you're completely blocked from getting any sort of privilege on the device, then you really are locked out. And the only thing you can do is say, we'll play the game by your rules, and you have to take care of everything for us. The challenge, of course, as we've seen, is that there are security issues in mobile. There are exploits. Exploits can be chained and combined with apps to deliver them. They can be done in a number of different techniques. And so what you have is an unfair balance, a balance where advanced adversaries, targeted attacks, certainly the folks that are trying to intercept financial transactions, have the ability to try to figure out how to gain root, to use that to their privilege, to their advantage, that is. And we, as the folks trying to defend the security of the devices, to try to protect our own devices, don't have a means to do that. And so now we have this fundamental mismatch. We know the bad guys, if they can do it, will do it and use it against us, but we don't have a legitimate way to do it ourselves. And so that's why we kind of threw out this notion of, hey, root's not all bad. You know, we need to really stop, take a deep breath, and learn to recognize that there are some really big upsides to root, and that we're not necessarily suggesting that the entire industry should always have root on the device. Clearly, there's been some changes out here that the paradigm has shifted. App stores have come about, a whole bunch of different intermixing between business and personal data sitting on these same devices. So a lot of things have changed, but we think the foregone conclusion on mobile that you shouldn't have root is one of those things that we need to challenge as an industry. And if we had that, what could we do? So some of the big ideas, I've kind of already mentioned it, user control. You know, how can we come out here and let the users truly control these devices? In general, I buy full-priced devices. I spend $650. I can jump around to any carrier that I want. I own that hardware. And almost on some sense, being a Linux user since the early 90s, it offends me that I'm blocked from tinkering and doing things that I want with that device. So the ability to have the users control their devices, we see a big need on the enterprise side. You know, viaProtect is a free app we have in the App Store. We'll touch on that in a little bit. For us on the enterprise side, rolling up visibility to what's going on in these devices, allowing the enterprise to begin to really get their arms around mobile risk. And how do we measure it? And how do we manage it? Not because of a piece of malware that occasionally may be present, but because of a much bigger picture of what drives risk on mobile. Insecure networks, configuration changes, heartbleed, operating system vulnerabilities, and certainly, last but not least, leaky apps. And then the last thing, and this is really important for security administrators or for security researchers, is just the notion of security tools, right? The ability to come in here and say, hey, maybe we want to do some timing-based attestation measurements. Maybe we want to get in there and really push hard on the secure element and understand, is NFC secure? You know, is host card emulation secure from a credit card standpoint, from mobile payments? You can't do these things without having privilege on the device. And so, you know, we really are focusing on some of these big ideas that we think root opens up. I'm going to take a quick pause here. I do have a few slides left, but I want to start answering questions as they come in. And so the first question that came in is, does rooting process have to touch the NAND, or can it take place in RAM? It's a great question. From a forensic standpoint, we actually look at root in a number of different ways, and the root that we prefer is what we call temporary root. And in that sense, yes, it is possible, although you can't do it in every instance, to gain root privileges and never essentially truly impact the NAND flash. Those techniques aren't necessarily that easy. They're not necessarily that common, but you would basically say, hey, there's an existing app or process that's running. We can send that a malformed byte. We can give it a certain type of data that it's not expecting, whatever it happens to be. We can ask it to write pieces of memory that are currently have read-write turned on. So Exynos is a great example. And these are essentially techniques where you can get root on a device and really not have to persist anything to the NAND flash. And then when you reboot the device, it's gone. And so that's really great from a forensic standpoint. I would say many, many cases in these day and age, there are a lot that end up writing something to the NAND flash, but sometimes you can write to parts of the NAND flash that are less important. Of course, the user data partition is one of the most important things. There's another question that's come in, which is asking about garbage collection on the hardware level. So does it take place on the hardware level? Does the OS play a role? And is there something that rooting can do to try to address that? I would say that garbage collection is definitely one of these challenges that we face that they're really largely outside your control. Back in the early days of Android, when they were implementing something called YAFS2, the layer at which you would do that control was something called Memory Technology Devices, MTD. And what we found is that that was software-based control. And so as forensics folks, we could go in there and with root, update those things and change how garbage collection occurs. That's really not happening these days anymore. What we found is the NAND flash providers are embedding the controllers for their NAND flash and all that logic directly into the chips themselves, right into the silicon. And so they're making those units that get shipped with the full controllers in firmware at that point. And so I would say in general, your ability to impact garbage collection and whatnot is quite limited, certainly on the most recent devices. So those are two great questions. Keep them coming, folks. And I'm going to go ahead and finish through the rest of the slides. So we talked about what root could potentially do for folks and what are some of the ideas. And it drives an interesting question. I mean, the question is about, open versus closed, proprietary, free, open source, whatever it happens to be. And there's a debate out there. It's been a debate. It'll continue to be debated for a long time, which is, which one of these systems is more secure? And, those are those big million-dollar questions that you never could say this one's more secure all the time than the other one. And a lot of times it comes down to personal belief. But there's a really interesting trend that we like to point out to folks, which is take a look at the CVE list. CVE stands for Common Vulnerability Enumeration. It's run for the government by MITRE, and it's a way that security researchers can track vulnerabilities that they found in different systems. And despite all of the press that we end up seeing about malware and security challenges in Android, there's a very big disproportionate number of CVEs that exist for iOS versus Android. There could be a bunch of different explanations, but one of the key things that I believe personally, is that both Apple and Google are commercial companies. They're pushing the market as fast as they can, but Apple does it in a very closed way. And there are parts of the Android operating system that are certainly closed sourced. You can't look at them freely, but there's a lot of it that is open, and you get a lot of eyeballs on it. You get a lot of interesting security research. So as we look at the core of the system, we end up seeing a higher velocity of security increase in Android than we see versus iOS. And, this might be, just a really slim margin. I mean, iOS has some fantastic security measures built in. They do a really good job of putting the system out there. The bigger concern that I have is that there are hundreds of potentially unknown issues that get unsurfaced and end up showing up in the CVE lists. There's PIN bypasses. There's all kinds of different things. And so while we see certainly a lot of press around Android being insecure, as we look out to very security-conscious companies and we see, where are they pushing and what are they trying to develop, a lot of times we see them implementing Android-based systems that they can inspect the code, they can kind of fork it, they can make some changes and push it out. And in fact, many of you probably heard of a company called Blackphone, which has been doing exactly that. So we tend to see, and my personal belief is that an open system will lend itself over time to a more secure environment than a closed system. So I'm going to go ahead and answer another question. It talks about what if a previously rooted mobile phone was stolen, and the thief had some sort of technical knowledge, can they kind of exploit that? So there's a couple things. We kind of break people that root their phones into a couple different categories. There's the people that basically do a point-and-click rooting technique, really don't know much about it, and they do it to get one or two features. Maybe they want tethering, maybe they want to install an alternative app store or whatnot. And then you've got the folks that really do know what they're doing. And in the first case, there are set defaults that sometimes happen. So one of the first things that ever happened on iOS from a quote-unquote malware standpoint was when the phones were jailbroken, they automatically enabled SSH. It was always listening out on a port, so you could scan for that port on the mobile network, and it always had the password of Alpine. So you could easily get into the phone and go do some things, and folks did that to kind of make the point. So in their default configurations, yes, it certainly is possible. But there's also some things that you end up doing if you get root and know what you're, really know what you're doing, that make a huge difference. So, for example, Google ended up getting rid of a app privacy feature where you could go app by app and decide which permissions you want to grant or allow. You had the ability to, back in like the Zone Alarm days, if people remember installing Zone Alarm on their home computers, you had the ability to say for every new outbound connection, do you deny it or approve it? You had the ability to do that, with root privileges, let's say on Android, where you could literally install a firewall inbound and outbound. You could literally require that new computers that have been connected to that phone, you have to accept the key, you have to authorize it, therefore you already have to have a PIN pass, and so you have to be able to get around that. So in a default configuration, are there ways to circumvent security on a rooted phone? Sure there are. There are on non-rooted phones as well, right? That's a big part of the forensics industry. And so I would say that there's actually a pretty good opportunity in front of folks that know what they're doing to really move the ball forward and saying, you know what, I have a device that I can get root, but I understand the significance of that, and I've used it to my advantage. And so I do think there's a way to make sure that you can make your device more secure. I'm going to keep going, but please, again, feel free to chime in with any questions you have. So we've kind of put this notion that, root's not all bad. It can be used by security researchers. It can increase control. It can increase security of the system. But can it really happen? And, this is where us, consumers, IT professionals, people that buy phones, can have an impact. And we're actually beginning to see a change in the ecosystem. So one of the things that I begin to notice is that even Apple, as of lately, certainly Samsung, LG, and Google, all of these large enterprises are beginning to make shifts towards the enterprise. I think the main reason they're doing it is because they're beginning to see or anticipate a slowdown in consumer growth, and they want to keep shipping more and more devices. But Samsung offers the ability to actually add a signing key during the manufacturing of the devices to the device that's specific to you. So you would have the ability to potentially sign your own apps with system privileges or push your own bootloaders in operating system versions. LG is making a move in that direction. Apple is trying to begin to address the intermixing of consumer and business data. And Google as well with the at-home stuff, bringing in Samsung Knox and things of that sort. So, can it happen? Well, this is going to be a market-driven, feature or possibility here. Today, consumers drive the market. I see that happening for a very, very long time, but we think that the enterprise can also begin to weigh in. And early on, Apple's like, look, so you're going to buy 100,000 phones. That's a lot of money to you. Yeah, it's a good invoice, but it's not that interesting to us when we're pushing these many devices. But they're beginning to start to see the upside to catering to that kind of enterprise and beginning to find ways to mature the platform. We also think consumer privacy is huge. I mean, people really are starting to wake up to the risks to their privacy, to their information, to apps that are leaking out data. And so as consumers choose devices that are either more secure, to give them a higher degree of control, I think, again, this market mentality is the industry can begin, the consumers can begin to push the industry in the direction they want, which is These have been fantastic features. These have been great pieces of hardware, but we care about security. We care about privacy. There's another question, and it says, I think, what is the most common way to gain root access? So, few things. One, let's break these into two different groups. The first group would be the iOS devices, and Apple provides no legitimate way to do this, and so you're stuck. And the only thing you can do is a jailbreak. The jailbreaks have become increasingly difficult, increasingly more complex, and there's a bunch of unknowns. The last two versions, one of them had Chinese app market bundled with it, and an app market that was known to potentially distribute pirated software and maybe even some malware. The latest one is Chinese-based as well. And so on the iOS side, you're really limited. And this is really one of the biggest challenges that we see, is that on the Android side, you're seeing more and more manufacturers offer unlocked bootloaders. The notion that, all right, here's the operating system. You can unlock the bootloader. When you do that, you're going to wipe up all the user data, erase the user data. And that's a security mechanism, and it makes a lot of sense, so that somebody can't steal your phone, unlock the bootloader, push their own ROM, and then steal all your data. But they're coming back to the market and saying, look, you can unlock it. You can then install whatever you want. It's probably going to void the warranty, but now you can get privilege on your device and do the different things that you want. So we think of that as a really good compromise, a really positive trend in the industry. And then, you also have the straight-up developer phones, right? These are the ones that Google puts out. They support root out of the gate. You can enable that. And they give you the ability to kind of get reference implementation for what Google thinks Android should be like on a device. And so as we look at those two platforms, iOS, you just have to jailbreak it. Android, you certainly can try to come out with, find different vulnerabilities. Talroot is the most recent one that came out by George Hotz, famous for the PS3 and other hacks out there. And so it's effective in rooting many devices. You can also just straight up go out and buy a developer phone or a phone that supports an unlocked bootloader. So if you're interested in this space, I think it's much better to probably look at the Android devices, although there's still an active jailbreak for 7.1.2 on iOS. Once Apple comes out with 8, that'll be patched, and you'll be stuck unless you have a 7.1.2 device. Another quick question that came in, which is, can an encrypted Android device be rooted? If so, could a NAND dump be performed and the binary data decrypted on the outside? Okay, so can an encrypted Android device be rooted? Absolutely. So think about the encrypted file system as simply a way to secure your data at rest. But for the operating system to boot up and do its thing, it's running, unencrypted in memory, and essentially most of those exploits are taking advantage of the operating system itself. So you'll be up and running in a normal way. You'll definitely be able to get root in the same way. And the other thing that's key is, and this is something that a lot of folks kind of miss about the difference between encryption and data at rest versus the system up and running. Once the phone is up and running, whether it's Android and iOS, you pretty much have the data decrypted. The operating system has to be able to present back to you your Gmail. They have to show you your text messages. So when you think about an encrypted NAND flash, what you really need to think about is that if a forensics person gets their hands on it, the device hasn't been booted up, they physically image the device. Maybe they're doing JTAG and chip off, literally get the bits and bytes off of there. It's going to be encrypted at rest on that disk, and then they would have to brute force the encryption. That's very difficult to do. We came up with a way to brute force Android encryption, and we released that I think 2 years ago at DEF CON. But since then, encryption there has gotten better, and then Apple embeds a chip in the device. So at rest, very difficult. But once the device is up and running, and you've essentially compromised the device or gotten root on it, you're pretty much going to be able to get the data off, and so that is not going to be an issue. So let me see if there's any other questions. Not right now. So I'm going to kind of we only have just another couple minutes left. I do want to touch briefly on viaProtect because viaProtect's an app that we've written. It's a free app. It's in the iOS and Android Play stores. and it's starting to, it drives real-time visibility into what's going on your device. Where's your data being sent? Who's getting their hands on it? Is it encrypted? It doesn't require root, but we think that as this mobile operating systems have changed the way that we approach security, the way that our data is stored, the way our data is sent, we really have to think about a change in how we approach security. We think the key there is visibility, and so you have to know what's going on in your device to then begin to work your way into, what are these more significant challenges that we need to face. And so, viaProtect's a really great app. If you're interested in it, go out to the Play or App Store, just search on the name viaProtect, download it. Big updates coming out in about 2 to 3 weeks where we'll have individual security feeds personalized for your device. And so as we look at the challenges in mobile, sure, root is one problem. Sometimes root is the best thing. Sometimes it could decrease your security. It's kind of a mixed bag. We think it's utterly necessary to have from a security industry standpoint. It allows the research that we need to do. But the real key to getting to the bottom of these is visibility on the device, understanding what's happening, establishing that baseline, and recognizing that the things that contribute to risk on these devices, again, include things like the networks you connect to, how you've configured your device, operating system and device vulnerabilities, and certainly, last but not least, leaky apps. So definitely check that out. We're officially at the QA section with just a minute or two left, and we've got another question. It says, let me shrink the font here a little bit. It's hard to read. It says, I've made a custom recovery partition for forensics, which I can access all the data on the phone and do a full logical acquisition on the phone. Is this forensically okay? If I don't change or tamper the data in the system, all of my work is in the recovery partition. So if you come across phones that allow you to boot a recovery ROM, that's a pretty darn good way to ensure a forensically secure acquisition. And I've testified in court on a number of occasions for mobile devices, of course, and quite frankly, we don't even get asked these types of questions. I think as an industry, there's a lot of unknowns about how do these things work, and we have the ability to explain, look, you can't attach a write blocker to these things. You can't treat them the same way as traditional computers. So what you proposed here is, I think, something that will be imminently admissible in court. And I'd also say, if you have a recovery partition, you could do a logical, which is really great, actually, because you can get the majority of the data you need, already in the format that you need it, because you're reading it right off of that file system. But of course, with that recovery partition, you could probably get a full physical image as well. The advantage there is that you can begin to do deleted data recovery as well. So it sounds like you're already a good way along the path there, but do bear in mind that not every phone will, of course, be able to boot a custom recovery image. So that will only work on certain phones. Maybe you have an enterprise deployment and know very well what your phones are, but it works in some cases and not all of them. So I'm going to kind of recap here real quick, and if one more question comes in that time, I'll answer it. Otherwise, just want to let you know that we're doing the viaTalks once a week now. We're targeting 30-minute or less talks. You can go out to hashtag viaTalks on Twitter at any time and kind of see the discussion, and hit our webpage, sign up, spread the word. We'll post some of these out as videos and snippets. And next week, we're doing a pivot from where we normally do, and we're going to be talking about UX challenges in mobile app development. So our director of UI UX is going to go ahead and lead that discussion. Certainly, we're noted more for forensics and security, but it should be a really great discussion. Phil Weber is going to lead that for us, and he's done a fantastic job making viaProtect more usable, more interesting, and more accessible for folks. So last question that snuck in here is root accessible on 4.4 KitKat coming? So let me rephrase. I think the question is saying, hey, can we still get root on 4.4 in KitKat? And if that's the question, yes. Google still provides a mechanism, for us to get root on these devices. They've got the developer phones. 4.4 brings a lot of other changes. There's some interesting changes in the runtime coming, moving away from the Dalvik virtual machine into the Android runtime, the ART, the new ART runtime. But we still anticipate being able to get root on these devices, which is really important for us as we do security research. Big part of what we do with viaLab, our mobile security lab. And there's actually going to be free community versions of both viaLab and viaExtract. So these are forensic and mobile app security testing platforms. They'll be somewhat limited in their functionality, but free community versions will be coming out over the next 1 to 2 months for both of those. And they're very dependent upon root access to be able to do the analysis. So I do still see that coming in 4.4 and remaining accessible. And I just want to thank everybody for your time today. We look forward to doing these. If you have some topic suggestions, please just send them to us by email. Send us a tweet about it. We're happy to cover it. Follow us on Twitter, or follow me at ahoog42 on Twitter. And we look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Thanks so much.